Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1165 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. This chapter was pure catharsis. Translation, it felt great. So look, we'll fanboy when we get to it later on in the review. But I just want to start off and highlight how all of this is really about saving people. And I'm not really sure that everybody, myself included, really understood that when the God Valley flashback began. So at this point, I feel as though everybody pretty much understands that God Valley is Treasure Island, and a lot of the commentary is about treasure and our collective desire to pursue it and acquire it. But Oda wants to make sure that you understand, the same as at the very beginning of the story with Buggy, right? That treasure is not just gold, jewels, wealth, power. That's for some people, that is their treasure, but it's not all treasure. So this idea was first planted with Shaki in Hachinosu. Shaki was like the crown jewel of Hachinosu. When she gets taken to God Valley, Shaki then becomes pretty much the crown jewel of God Valley. Shaki is a person, and she is loved, desired, or valued greatly. So this chapter reiterates this to a small extent. There's a throwaway line from Roger of like, the only reason I came here was to get Shaki and grab some treasure. Wasn't really anticipating all of this, which I don't blame him. So Shaki is this treasure that Roger was adventuring for, you could say, right? Like this treasure that he was pursuing. And as with all treasures, like not only is it important to acquire it, but you also have to protect it. So Oda is playing around with the multiple interpretations of this thought or this idea, and so Roger essentially came to God Valley to protect Shaki. But not everyone treasures the same things or values treasure to the same level, so you have a character like Rox, who is also coming to God Valley to protect someone, but in this case not Shaki, it's his wife Eris and his son Teach. But I guess what somewhat frustrated me at the beginning of this flashback is people didn't apply this same concept to literally everybody who was coming to God Valley, and I think that it led to a lot of really terrible takes, mainly about Garp. But I'm super glad that this chapter exists and that Oda decided to be very overt about this. Garp is just the same as Roger, just the same as Rox, just the same as literally everybody else, and we could discuss the everybody else if you really want to. Garp is in God Valley to protect his treasure, which isn't necessarily a person, but it is people. So now we don't have to speculate it, we don't have to theorize it, it is now canonized. Garp's treasure is the Marines themselves, and all the people within the Marines. For whatever reason, it seems to me that people really understand a character like Whitebeard. Whitebeard is this father figure to all of these children that he's adopted, and so the idea that Whitebeard would do anything to protect them, and that they are his treasures, intuitively makes sense. You don't have to clarify it or explain it, it's just like, we get it. And Whitebeard is celebrated for it. But Garp really was not thought about in the same way, and was not given the same sort of grace. So I hope that we can finally kill this conversation. Garp is in an incredibly sympathetic position that is really unfortunate. Like, anecdotally speaking, I don't know if this is actually true, but certainly sounds good in my head. We can't control the things that we love. We love the things that we love. It's an is. That isn't to say that what we love doesn't change, right? But we have very little to no control over it. And Garp just loves the Marines, man. That's his treasure. It doesn't have to be logical. It doesn't have to be rational. It doesn't have to make any sense whatsoever except to the character or you as a person. I'll die and tell you that I love the Coca-Cola coffee things that they had for like 1 year and then it disappeared, probably never to return. What you and other people thought about it is totally irrelevant to me. I like what I like and I love those things. So a lot of people wanted Garp to be rational, to be logical, to be the hero, and realize that the evil of this world is the celestial dragons and the world government by extension. But I think that it is pretty obvious that Garp has realized that if he turns into essentially his son Dragon and declares war on the government and the celestial dragons, he is also tearing apart and killing the Marines. That's why he can't do it. And honestly, this just reaffirms how brilliant the setup of Marineford was. I love being able to look back at past arcs with new information and just appreciate it even more than I did before. But you realize with this now being canonized that Garp in Marineford, he had two things that he loved simultaneously. He loved the Marines as an organization, and he loved Ace, and Oda put him in a situation where he had to choose. And hell, you could add Luffy to this as well. So again, outsiders or other people could say from 1,000 feet above, well, this choice should be easy. But in my opinion, recontextualize what is actually happening is Garp has 3 grandsons. And he was essentially put in a situation where he has to choose to save one and kill the other. Could you imagine trying to do this in real life? I mean, I'm sure everybody out there has family. Hopefully you have family that you care about. You get to choose one to save and the other one dies. If you really and truly love them all, this is simply not a choice that we are equipped to make, which is why Garp did basically nothing. And going back to the comparison that Oda is making, that the things that we love are also our treasures, how this paints Garp and everyone else really as pirates is just really profound to me. Like, bro, I feel very confident saying that one of the morals here in Oda's story is that we are all pirates. It's just that many forms of piracy are not considered piracy. In God Valley, Emu is also a pirate protecting Emu's treasure. In this case, Emu's treasure is something close to Emu's dream world, or just their dream to create a world of their own making where they are king for eternity. So in my mind, a big thing which separates regular people from like truly evil people is whether or not you love other people. Like the idea that a person or people or a group of people are your treasures that you would do anything to protect is a wholesome form of piracy, separated from the true evil which only care about themselves. Anyway, to take this back to Garp, I think the thing which comes to my mind, this is going to be super controversial, I think a lot of people are not going to like this, but I'm going to say it anyway. A lot of this reminds me of Usopp in Water 7. Like, a lot of people are not going to remember this, but I made a video many years ago that basically Usopp did nothing wrong in Water 7, something to that effect, or Luffy was wrong, and I think that it's still true that Luffy was perhaps partially wrong, but anyway, all of this is making me understand Usopp and that whole story in Water 7. I suppose if I'm gonna call out people for their bad Garp takes here in God Valley, I might as well do the same for myself. To go back to our hypothetical with Garp, what is the correct choice in a situation where you have, for instance, 2 grandchildren that you love, and you have to kill one to save the other? Hopefully assuming that you love them both essentially equally. What is the objectively correct choice? So in Water 7, Usopp faced essentially this same choice because Usopp loved what he considered to be a member of the Strat crew, the Going Merry, but of course he also loved the rest of the crew and Luffy. So firstly, in Usopp's mind, he thought that Luffy was making this choice. He thought that Luffy was choosing everybody else over the Going Merry. He was choosing one child over the other. Now granted, part of this is that Luffy didn't understand that the Going Merry was alive. This is something that Usopp had to first argue. It's like, Going Merry is very much a living being. And it wasn't until the end of Enies Lobby when the Going Merry literally sailed itself and saved them, proving without a shadow of a doubt that it was a living being, that I think Luffy truly understood this. So he was making this choice, choosing essentially one crew member over the other, a choice he wouldn't make in any other situation. Imagine Luffy choosing between, for instance, Usopp and Nami. He wouldn't do that, right? So he was making that choice here, but it was a lot of ignorance. So Luffy and Usopp's fight had a lot to do with this subject, and I think communicates what the story, at the very least, perceives to be the objectively correct choice here, which is that you don't choose one Nakama, you don't choose one child over the other. They're all treasures and you protect it all. So the Luffy choice in all of this, the correct choice in all of this, is to discover some way of not sacrificing one or the other, but essentially breaking the rules. You have to choose one or the other, somebody must die. Luffy does the impossible and saves them both. Or at the very least, Luffy commits himself to, he believes in or hopes for the possibility that you can save both. So where Usopp actually went wrong in all of this wasn't defending the Going Merry, wasn't communicating to Luffy that the Going Merry was alive and that it should be protected. Usopp actually did what he thought Luffy was doing. He chose the Going Merry over the rest of the crew. And he did this for a couple different reasons, but mainly centering around his insecurity. Basically, to Usopp, the Going Merry represented Usopp's place in the crew as something that was weak and therefore unnecessary and disposable. If the crew would cast aside the Going Merry, then Usopp believed that the crew at some point would cast aside Usopp, so this is the line that he drew in the sand. Not for the sake of the crew, but to reassure himself. But this is reiterated throughout the story. I've said this a lot recently, so we'll keep it brief, right? Every single member of the Strat crew, including weak Usopp, is vital. Luffy believes, and I think he believes rightly, that losing any of them will lead to the death, failure, and defeat of the entire crew. I know that a lot of people don't really think about Usopp that way. Like, how important is Usopp really? I think by the time that the story concludes, he will have a role in the story that will probably blow your mind, and you'll realize, like, wow, Usopp was required. I'm just saying, guys, wait for it. It will happen. We'll reach the conclusion of this story, and if Usopp had not been a part of the crew, Luffy does not win. And it won't be something shallow or cheesy like Usopp just defeats one of the final antagonists of the series, like a member of Blackbeard's crew, or somebody associated with Emu. It's not just defeating somebody. I mean, like, his presence, his character is integral, totally irreplaceable. So with this in mind, this is the other half of the conversation of Usopp in Water 7, is that Usopp did not actually believe himself to be important to the Strat's success. So when he chose the Going Merry over the crew, he didn't see it as dooming the Strat crew. But had he not returned as Sogeking, I believe that he was. So he chose one loved one over the others, sacrificing one for the other. He made the choice that he himself was criticizing. And although there is a little bit of ignorance and lack of self-belief that sort of justifies this, all of this is why Usopp was wrong. And as a side note, you'll also note that Sanji made the same sort of choice in Zou and Whole Cake Island as well, so it's not just an Usopp thing. But anyway, guys, wild tangent aside, I hope I gave you enough context to sort of understand this. You can apply all of this to Garp in Marineford, and Garp throughout the entirety of his life following God Valley. You want to criticize him for not turning on the world government, but he believed that turning on the world government was another way of disbanding his crew or destroying his crew, the Marines. So I think that he did the right thing. The objectively correct decision as far as the story of One Piece is concerned. And I think, this isn't canonized, but I think Garp was just waiting to discover a way to protect everybody that he loved. He's maybe not verbalized this in the same way that Luffy has, but Garp is on an adventure to become the freest person that can just have all the things that he wants. He could just never figure out how to obtain this treasure. I think that this is implied, but the closest Garp ever got is the realization that if he wanted to be free, he should never ever become an admiral, and probably after God Valley, that was when he rejected promotion, which is also part of the story of God Valley. You can think Roger, right? Like, Roger could never figure out how to obtain Shaki, and the moral is that some treasures are just simply not meant for you to have. So really, the only realistic wrong thing Garp could have done is do what the fans wanted him to do, which is turn on the world government. I hope that this makes sense. But you know how it goes in a JB review, right? We start with a point, and then we have a tangent, and then we have a tangent to the tangent. It becomes tangent inception. This is my world, and you guys are just living in it. So going all the way back to the beginning of the video, basically the idea of God Valley is that everybody is here to protect their treasures, and this sort of manifests itself in most cases as coming to protect somebody or save somebody. God Valley is about the struggle to save the ones that you love. But another moral to the story is the adventure. When you're on the adventure, you don't actually know which treasures you might find. This is what makes the adventure itself exciting. The unknown or the unpredictable. Luffy sort of lives this as island to island he acquires new friends, new people that he loves and desires to protect. These are unexpected treasures. So Garp came here for the Marines, and Roger came here with his crew to save Shaki, and even Rox himself came here for his family, but they all of them ended up attempting to save Abdodoesart himself. And Rox is over here attempting to save himself from himself. And just the same as our earlier conversations, they are 100% putting their lives on the line in order to protect this newly found treasure. And they also have absolutely no idea how to accomplish this. Like, I just hope that you guys picked up on this, because this is absolutely part of this chapter. Roger asks Garp for a truce, and Garp says, "Oh, I don't really like it, but something needs to be done about Rox." And it's not just killing Rox, it's saving Rox. There's even a few lines in the middle of this chapter where they say, this curse, can't we undo it somehow? Wake up. And I'm gonna say another thing that I think that a lot of people are going to hate, but I think this is pitted against or contrasted against Dragon in this chapter. Dragon wants to save everybody. Dragon wants to protect all of the innocents, but at the end of God Valley, he's basically saying, look, we're gonna save everybody, and if anybody's got a problem with that, I will kill you. It's literally a contradiction, one I think was very intentional on Oda's part. Dragon was playing favorites, threatening to kill some innocents in order to protect the other innocents, while believing this to be the heroic thing to do. But don't get me wrong, I totally understand the end of this chapter, and ultimately it seems implied that Garp and Roger had resolved themselves to kill XEBEC in order to save Rox and everybody else. But to me at least, and I could be wrong, already argued, been wrong before, right? But the spirit of Garp and Roger and Rox seems a bit different. But just to play devil's advocate, right, if I am wrong, it just could be the case that what Oda intended was for Dragon and Garp and Roger to be essentially the same thing happening simultaneously. Playing favorites, choosing one treasure over another. Because it seems as though it is the only choice that can be made in a world where anything is actually possible. But yeah, I'm probably shooting myself in the foot. I expect to be killed in the comments because people will say, well, of course Roger values his crew, the ones that he loves, his actual treasure more than XEBEC, this guy that he's been frenemies with for a long time, or just straight up enemies. Like, it's not the same. You understand this, I understand this. There's a deeper conversation to be had. It may be true that you love your oldest child more than your youngest child for whatever reason. It may be true. Doesn't change the fact that you shouldn't make that choice. Within all of this, I got the impression that Rox had earned Roger and Garp's respect and love. He became another treasure that was worth protecting or saving. Oda made this abundantly clear when he pointedly drew Roger crying before the final attack. And so with all this being said, guys, I finally get to say something that I've wanted to say and believe this entire time. I've heard people comment this, and like, as an idea, of course, it's possible, but like, do I actually believe it? Now, I finally do. Guys, XEBEC did not die in God Valley. We'll get into the entire conversation about this in a moment, but I believe that Roger and Garp discovered how to damage these immortal beings. But I think that they left Rox crippled, but not dead. They didn't want it to happen, therefore it didn't happen. This is my simple logic that makes sense to me. Is this just what I want to believe? Yeah, you better believe it. This is what I want to believe, therefore I believe it. So a theory that we've talked about on the channel for a very, very long time, and I've kind of avoided bringing up in this flashback because sometimes it's just too much, right? But what we speculated for a very long time is that XEBEC's soul or spirit, his existence, exists within Blackbeard. There is something very strange about Blackbeard that is not explained by anything that we currently know. Blackbeard's body is strange. Blackbeard doesn't sleep. Blackbeard is currently the only known person who has the ability to, or has actually consumed more than one devil fruit. Why is this the case? The most obvious, intuitive, and straightforward answer is that XEBEC still exists within Blackbeard. Also, bear in mind that Rox doesn't have a devil fruit here, so maybe Rox ended up getting the devil fruit that he always wanted anyway. And as we've speculated for an eternity, Blackbeard is really more than one person. Look, I'm not going to delve into this in its entirety and explore all of the specificities of it, but just think about this for a moment. Like, Rox is consciously within Blackbeard. Blackbeard, the actual Blackbeard's soul goes to sleep. Rox's soul wakes up. That's why Blackbeard doesn't sleep. So there are times when it's literally XEBEC in control of Blackbeard's body. And then think about the person that Blackbeard is today. To me, at the very least, it's heartbreaking to think that Rox basically did die in God Valley. The person that Rox was, the person that essentially by the end of this we were rooting for, that seemed like one of the greatest people on the planet, like, that guy is dead and gone. He's metaphorically or literally succumbed to the demon within him after this Rox changed. And maybe some of you will hate to hear it, but it's probably just got to be said. If we assume this to be true, then there's also the possibility that Blackbeard is basically evil because he's literally got a demon inside of him, and they're potentially is some cure. Blackbeard can be saved. Also, in basically any other supernatural story, when you have a demon inside of you, what this is called is being possessed, right? Very similar to what we called what Emu is doing to their subordinates. So in a roundabout way, as Rox is fighting Emu throughout the course of his life, I assume in God Valley, Rox has now essentially become Emu within Blackbeard. This is a parallel. So there's really two requirements, I think, for this theory, both of which are extremely plausible, and I mean, you can't really refute it, it's just whether you believe it or not. Firstly, Rox survived, and Emu, world government, whatever, was able to collect his spirit or essence in some form. The other half of this is that, similar to after Roger passed, right, they scoured the planet for Ace, they would have had to successfully discover Teach. And then using the power of science, which has been building up in the post-time skip, they combined the two. And the theory that I've liked about this for a pretty long time now is just like really simply, Blackbeard now has two hearts, literally two hearts. And guys, I just absolutely love this idea for a number of reasons, but the main reason is it makes Blackbeard unique. It makes Blackbeard one of one. We now know Emu exists, we now understand at least somewhat Emu's powers, so we know that more demonification is going to happen in the future of the story. But Blackbeard is this weird case where he's not actually transformed into a demon, it's demonception because within him is a demon. And the thematic layers to this are just jaw-dropping if you really sit down and think about it. Because this demon within him is also his father, or, like his ancestors, right? He is quite literally, in a different way than everybody else, inherited the will of his father. But his father's will has actually been corrupted, so he has inherited a will of essentially pure malice and hatred. So think Hody Jones in Fishman Island, but in a completely unique way. In the same way that dreams can be inherited, nightmares can be inherited as well. A lot of people treat hate as a treasure that must also be protected. They love to hate and don't want to forget or forgive the wrongs of the past. So basically, Blackbeard's literal character design reflects something that is a little less tangibly true for everybody else. And when you start having this conversation, to me, what comes to mind is Blackbeard's line that dreams never die. Both dreams in the good sense and dreams in the bad sense. Maybe replace the word dreams with desires, because in One Piece, I think that these are synonyms. Dreams, desires, tomato, tomato. Like, you better believe, I've been thinking about this for a long time. But to me, I think in the world of One Piece, dreams literally do not die. Dreams either get inherited and passed down, or they get forgotten and sent to a metaphorical purgatory of dreams. And I think that being forgotten, or the idea of being forgotten, is something that's crucial to the story. It also relates to Dr. Hiruluk, right? A man dies when he is forgotten. And then suddenly you can twist this in a jaw-dropping way of something that most of us dream for is to one day meet those that have died already, meet them again, right? So we don't actually truly die until people have forgotten that we exist, because once they've forgotten that we exist, they can no longer dream to meet us again. Anyway, we suddenly jumped into very high level stuff here. But despite this seeming like it's coming out of left field, I did feel as though it needed to be included because of the title of the chapter. Echoes or reverberations, also the last line from the narrator. The Rox pirates who wreaked havoc on their era cast unmistakable reverberations that shook the very world. To me, the reason Oda titled this chapter the way that he did is because of how important this event was on the inherited will in a lot of different directions. Despite the fact that the Rox pirates ended here, this event essentially shaped the future. Very important dreams or desires were inherited, which to me plays to the fact that we know that the Rox pirates were erased from history. Emu attempted to erase them, but didn't really. Because all of this was unforgettable for those that survived, which might include Rox himself. But either way this goes, I'm just going to prepare you. Either way this goes, I will definitely be right? Because either Rox is literally alive, spiritually his soul still exists, or Rox clearly has not been forgotten, so he's not dead yet. That's what Hiruluk says. I win either direction. But anyway, let's take a breath and just power scale this fight, because I think normally I don't power scale, and I'm not particularly good at it, but I think that this chapter is important because Garp and Roger explain with words the dynamic of the fight that was happening. Roger says, first of all, the color of armament is a power that doesn't yield to the devil fruits. And on top of that, I was wreathed in color of the Supreme King or Conqueror's Haki. There's no way it couldn't have hurt him. Garp says, yeah, but he was guarding with Conqueror's Haki as well, so they cancel out. Roger says, exactly my point. There's no damage unless we surpass that. If it's all down to who wears out first, we'll lose. There's no way to keep up with a monster like that thing. So to me, this is explaining the vast majority of top tier fights in the series up until now. You know, you've ever watched any fight, whether it's Whitebeard versus Roger, or it's Big Mom versus Kaido. You can go on down the list, but the way that these fights are described, Akainu versus Aokiji, the way that these fights are described is they literally last for days, and there's no winner until the very end. Some of this is potentially uncertain and debatable. As an example, I threw in Akainu and Aokiji. Do they have advanced Conqueror's Haki? Like, it wouldn't shock me if they did, but it also, you know, it'd be kind of a leap to say that they did. So let's just ignore that. But I assume that these fights are happening for days because of advanced Conquerors. As Roger and Garp explain here, I have advanced Conquerors, they have advanced Conquerors, and it's canceling each other out, and we're basically not doing anything to each other. So it literally becomes something that is low-key just the case anyway, a battle of wills. Whoever runs out of stamina first loses the fight, and this plays out over the course of several days. So I don't think it's yet outright stated in the story, but I do think that there are differences in Advanced Conqueror's Haki users. Basically, you know, they might both have the ability, but one person has a quantifiable greater will, and therefore will be able to last or have more stamina to endure and eventually win the fight, however long that might take. But as Garp and Roger say this, we can see them and they've literally sustained damage. And this adds another component to this equation, which is the physical strength of the person that is using Advanced Conquerors. Rox has been transformed into a demon. We know that part of this increases their strength, and Roger refers to him as a monster, and it's because he's a monster that they're not going to win the fight this way. So this is going to shock literally nobody, right? But I think that we can consider Garp and Roger to be exact equals, or thereabouts. And I think Whitebeard is almost there as well. I think I put Whitebeard slightly below them, but the difference is negligible. And I think that it's also important to note that at least in the pre-time skip, Whitebeard was considered to be the strongest person in the world. I know that people out there will say, well, in a one-on-one fight, you should bet on Kaido, so Kaido was the strongest. I'm not interested in engaging in this. So just believe what you want and then hear what I have to say. Personally, I would put both Big Mom and Kaido below Whitebeard before Whitebeard got old. And you can do this however you want to. It could be a close difference. It could be a more substantial difference. It doesn't matter to me. The point is that Kaido and Big Mom, different to everybody else, are monsters. They're not quite XEBEC, but I think the same concept would apply to them. They have freakish natural strength, which would likely help them even the odds against characters which potentially have stronger wills and would outlast them in a duel. So I guess what I'm wondering to myself, with a character like Blackbeard, because we've been speculating that Blackbeard might be some sort of creation of the government, some sort of experiment or something, is Blackbeard now a monster? Also consider that Blackbeard has Buccaneer blood. Would he be given those extra bonus points? And this leads to my second question. I'm not actually entirely sure what the answer to this question is, but is Blackbeard's will equal to Luffy's? Does Blackbeard possess his father's will? Because if both of these things are true, also Blackbeard has an extra double fruit, potentially another one, then all of this may be something approximating an objective measure that Blackbeard is stronger than Luffy, assuming that he learns these advanced Haki techniques, which I assume that he will. But naturally, regardless of anything that we've said here, at the end of the story, Luffy probably has to defeat Blackbeard, and this chapter alludes at some kind of even more advanced technique, which Roger refers to as mass or critical mass. I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm assuming that learning this is going to be necessary for Luffy to be able to defeat Blackbeard, probably also Emu. Not just demons. I honestly think that Oda just overscaled Advanced Conqueror's Haki. It's gone the way of Gear 2nd. So the question now is, what exactly is this mass or critical mass? And if you look at the wording of this, critical mass, what you should be thinking of is, and we've talked about this way too much on this channel, more than you can believe, right? We should be talking about physics, because that is what this reminds me of. Critical mass is a term that is related to nuclear physics. I halfway want to believe right now that Roger and Garp literally split their own atoms. And they also suggest that after using the attack, it's almost probably fatal. Honestly, I kind of think that we might have discovered here what led to Roger's early death and disease. And I know that this doesn't necessarily apply to Garp, but I assume that Roger went a bit harder after all this than Garp did, and so it cut his lifespan. Or he potentially used the attack more than once. Garp used it here. Roger had so much more left to accomplish after all this. At least that makes sense to me. So frankly, all of this works really well in my head as far as narrative design or, design for the story. We said that Advanced Conquerors was overscale, and that's true, but only partially true, or at least it adds dynamics to the story if there's something stronger than it, but also there's only a finite number of times you can actually use it before you die. Oda's suggested or done this before, doing it again at the end of the story with, different names. Wouldn't shock me. But anyway, I don't really want to get into the physics of all of this, and I think that it would confuse too many people, but if you're looking for a really simplistic way of explaining critical mass, it's basically like the minimum amount of a substance, for instance uranium, needed to sustain a nuclear reaction. If you think about this as the fuel for the atomic bomb or like the gunpowder, you need some amount of gunpowder for the bullet to fly. The minimum amount needed is your critical mass. So if we assume the terminology in this chapter is related to nuclear physics, then it kind of suggests that there's some important substance that Roger and Garp possess that they are very careful in using. So to go back to my really dumb examples with gunpowder, you could potentially use more gunpowder than is necessary and the bullet will still fly. Perhaps it would fly further. You know what? I'm not going to dovetail this in things that I don't know. Regardless, you can do more than the minimum and that would be okay. So the idea of critical mass, the minimum amount of the substance needed in order to create the chain reaction, suggests that you should be very careful with whatever this fuel source is. You do not want to waste it. So guys, for a long time, we've discussed soul power. And basically the idea is that hockey is related to the soul. And in this chapter, Garp and Roger describe armament hockey and supreme or Conqueror's hockey, Advanced Conqueror's hockey, as like a coating. They coat their bodies in whatever that is, their will or their soul. But if you're coating your body in this substance, you're not actually losing it. So you don't have to be judicious. You don't have to, worry about wasting it, right? You're just covering your body in it. Afterwards, it doesn't go away. It doesn't dissipate. So to me, this might imply that what's happening with this new technique is different. Basically, I think that this technique literally burns away your own soul, which Big Mom, the user of the soul fruit, describes soul as lifespan. So this is a technique which directly costs your own remaining life. Something to the effect of the minimum number of years of your own life exploding as energy in an attack. And I'm not going to pretend as though I understand this, but some of this could be related to demonification as well, because we've seen Emu flip Dory and Brogy into demons. Look at their eyes. It's almost like flames behind their eyes. We saw the very same thing when Big Mom used her own techniques. Her devil fruit is the soul fruit. She also had like the flame eyes and she grew stronger. So I suppose this is just something that you should keep in your back pocket. I can't explain it. I really can't. I'm just saying I feel as though we're talking about the right things. And the other thing that you should be thinking of with all of this is the mother flame or the eternal flame. Flames behind their eyes, mother flame, eternal flame. The attacks in this chapter that Roger and Garp used are God of Fire, Infinitum, Ace Explosion. Various versions of flames again. And of course, we also know that eventually Roger named his son Ace, and Ace ate the flame or the fire Logia devil fruit. So we already speculated that this new technique might be inspired from or related in some way to physics, nuclear physics. And this is something that we had already been talking about with the Mother Flame and the Eternal Flame. Vegapunk essentially wanted to create this unlimited energy source. He called it the power of the sun, which is not quite the atomic bomb, right? It's not quite what we currently use as an energy source, nuclear fission. It's nuclear fusion, which would theoretically be the energy source which would surpass this thing we're talking about with critical mass. Rather than a chain reaction of atoms splitting, we're talking about a chain reaction of atoms combining. Anyway, I'm very likely to lose people, so I don't think that this is the time or place to have this conversation in full, but I do think that these are things that are worth thinking about. Science and technology is becoming a more important thing in the endgame of One Piece, and the world of One Piece, it seems like to me, is getting closer and closer to the literal power of the sun, or the power of the sun god Nika. I'm gonna say this and it'll either make sense to you or it won't, but the idea essentially is that the sun is God. Everything that exists in the real world, the earth, everything originally was created within a star. So suns or stars are cosmic creators. And if you add some spirituality to science, you can basically think of us as like every person that exists. Like we are little tiny suns that are not very bright. If you put all of our mass together, including the mass of everything else that exists, you eventually arrive at a star. The critical mass to form a star is about 0.08 of our solar masses, so 0.08 of the mass of our sun in the sky. You can also think about this in terms of planets, which the Gorosei are named after. As an example, Jupiter, if Jupiter had roughly 80 to 85 times its current mass, Jupiter, the planet in our solar system, would be a very tiny star. It requires more mass to become a star. Although from Earth, if you look into the sky at night, Jupiter would resemble, because it's close enough, would resemble just another star and was considered that for a very long time. But anyway, I'm gonna stop this conversation here, guys. I have more thoughts, but there's something to be said about saying something at the right time, if for no other reason than to not come off as entirely batshit crazy. If anything that we've said here is on target at least a little bit, I can expound upon it a lot. And I hope to one day have the ability to attempt this. But the basic premise is that the world of One Piece, the way that Oda designed it, is a combination of actual science and various kinds of spirituality. This chapter and discussions surrounding mass and critical mass very much lend to these sorts of thoughts. But anyway, aside from all this, the fan service in this chapter was just incredible. It was a joy to read. Seeing Roger and Garp side by side and just the physical similarities between Garp and Luffy and Roger and Ace, you could very clearly see it in this chapter. It gave me chills. And with how much XEBEC also looks like Blackbeard, it just makes you wonder about future dynamics between Luffy and Blackbeard. Throughout this entire chapter, Rocksteady XEBEC is drawn crying, and obviously his actions don't represent his mentality, but you can see his thoughts throughout of just kill me. He's suffering. If our theory is right that Rox is still alive, or specifically Rox is within Blackbeard, then this would still be true. Rox still needs to be saved. We've talked a lot about promises in the last few chapter reviews, and we got another one in this chapter where both Garp and Roger promise to the people that they care about or their subordinates or their friends that, hey, we've got something to take care of, but we will be back. And we've essentially argued that in the world of One Piece, promises will eventually be fulfilled. So this is another example of a promise, and in this case, it was fulfilled. But you'll notice that neither Garp nor Roger promised to XEBEC that they would kill him despite him asking. So no promise was made. So could this imply in the future of the story, it isn't Rox's fate to be killed? They literally ask him within the chapter, is there some way to undo this? And I think, intuitively speaking, there probably is some way to undo demonification. So as a potential parallel to Rox here, literally crying, asking to be killed, asking to be saved, if Rox is within Blackbeard, then Blackbeard, the actual soul of Teach himself, might be very similar to Rox, just within the body, crying for freedom. It's just the first time ever that I've even considered the idea that Blackbeard might survive the end of this story. And there's some possibility that if our theory is true that Blackbeard has XEBEC's heart within him, has more than one heart within him, that he and his father can sort of live out the remainder of their lives together, sort of free of Emu's corruption. I have no idea how exactly to word this, but these sorts of things just remind me of some of the dynamics between other father and children dynamics recently in the story, such as Jewelry Bonnie and Kuma. Kuma was turned into a demon in a very different way, but Jewelry Bonnie did save him. And he's both already dead and gone, but also still right there. They'll set out into the sunset together. And it's just incredibly obvious to me as you look at XEBEC in this chapter and you see the pain beneath the surface. Something very similar definitely occurred with Kuma in Egghead and the events before that. It just wasn't drawn in the same way. But I'd wager that both Kuma and XEBEC, the very same, want to be free from the world government or Emu's control. And Vegapunk did actually do this for Kuma, because eventually the one controlling Kuma was the one that Kuma wanted to be his king or his ruler, his master, Jewelry Bonnie, the daughter he loved. And while I'm definitely out here in space, right, this conversation might also be something that we could consider with Marco the Phoenix, and the reveal, it seems like, of his father, Polo. I've already seen this theory thrown out there. I like it very much, so I'm gonna reiterate it here. Marco Polo. Is Polo Marco's father, or is Polo just Marco? Guys, the whole idea of the game of Marco Polo is you cover your eyes in the water. One person says Marco, the other person says Polo, and the objective is to eventually find each other, to play tag, or in One Piece terms, to meet each other again. All of this is also related to the actual historical adventurer explorer, Marco Polo. I think it would be fair to imagine Marco Polo as being something akin to Louis Arnott. But the idea of the theory basically is that from the moment in the distant past that a child, likely a 7-year-old child, ate the Phoenix Devil Fruit, they grow old, and when they die, they respawn again as a 7-year-old child. The very moment that they originally, hundreds of years ago, ate the fruit. And I presume in the process they lose all of their memories. So Polo isn't really Marco's father, Polo is Marco. Polo then traveled with the Whitebeard Pirates, died, and then was respawned as Marco. So essentially, this character probably represents the idea of reincarnation. One soul living many, many, many lives. But it could also interrelate with the idea of meeting your ancestors again. Like the shared spiritual connection or the inherited will sort of thing. Look, I don't have the words for this, but I'm sure that you understand what I'm trying to say. I am 100% sure that we're going to look back on Marco Polo and think to ourselves, that is an incredibly genius design. Basically, Marco and Polo are playing Marco Polo with their ancestors and also all of the people that they have come to love throughout the course of their many lives. What makes this character unique is that they do not die. Their soul, if they have a soul, right, it gets reincarnated, they respawn, they lose their memories, but they don't die. So they have yet to meet everyone else that they loved or love in heaven. So long as this devil fruit continues to exist and has the same powers that we're speculating that it's having, Marco and Polo are playing an unending game of tag that they cannot win. Or if this is slightly wrong, right, and other characters reincarnate, like souls reincarnate in the story of One Piece, it's related to Eastern philosophies, then Marco Polo is playing Marco Polo with the ones that they loved in former lives. They're basically looking for the souls of those that they had befriended in prior lives. So the soul of Whitebeard was something that was calling to Polo, because in a prior life, the user of the Phoenix Devil Fruit had befriended Whitebeard's soul. They were friends in another time and place. Anyway, this is so far above my pay grade that, yeah. At the very least, I hope that you can see how Marco and Polo, these ideas might interrelate with other things that we were discussing earlier in the chapter review. And perhaps it's not a coincidence that the reader request that Oda took in this week was to draw Law and Beppo in the sky and like this very like heaven-like thing. But yeah, guys, I'm really interested to know if the flashback just ends after this chapter or we continue with King Harold. I presume that this flashback isn't over. We will eventually, like this is all leading up to the day that King Harold actually dies. So this is the craziest flashback that we've ever gotten. I feel comfortable saying that. I kind of feel as if this review isn't very good. I apologize for my head literally being up in the clouds, but talk about what I think is worth talking about. As always, though, I'm curious as to what you guys think, whether you know something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.